When the police called my parents to the emergency room, my father walked into the room ready to offer another cold, rehearsed excuse. He thought I was just an ungrateful 15-year-old who had run off into a freezing blizzard to throw a temper tantrum. But the moment his eyes landed on the man sitting quietly by my bedside, holding my warm blanket while a heart monitor beeped in the background, the color drained completely from my father's face. His hands began to shake so violently he had to grab the doorframe just to stay standing. "You," my father whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying mix of guilt and horror. You can't be here. You died 12 years ago." But my rescuer didn't flinch. He just looked at my father with absolute calm and said, "I survived the night you left me, Richard. And tonight, I saved your daughter from the exact same fate. My name is Clara, and I'm 27 years old. Looking back now, I realize my home was never a sanctuary. It was a battleground where the rules were rigged from the start. Growing up, my older sister, Chloe, was the golden child, flawless, celebrated, and incapable of doing wrong in my parents' eyes. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat, constantly living in her shadow and bearing the blame for every minor flaw in our household. Everything turned completely upside down the winter I turned 15. I developed a severe, debilitating respiratory illness that left me bedridden with a burning fever and a chest that felt like it was trapped in a vice. But in my father Richard's eyes, my sickness wasn't a tragedy. It was a costly inconvenience that disrupted his pristine domestic image and drained his patience. Seeing an opportunity to push me even further out of the picture, Chloe orchestrated a cruel, calculated lie. She shattered several irreplaceable family heirlooms and hid my father's missing business ledgers in my closet, tearfully telling my parents that I had done it in a bitter, medicine-fueled rage. When my father marched into my bedroom, his face twisted in disgust, he didn't see a gasping, feverish 15-year-old girl struggling to breathe. He saw a nuisance he was ready to discard forever. The night the storm hit, the temperature plummeted well below freezing, and a relentless blizzard engulfed our mountain town. Winds howled against the shuttered windows like desperate warnings, but inside, a far more dangerous storm was brewing. Fueled by Chloe's calculated lies, my father's temper erupted into an absolute fury. He grabbed my arm, wrenching me out of bed despite my violent shivering and the fever burning through my body. "I won't listen to another one of your pathetic excuses," Richard roared, his voice cutting through my wheezing coughs. My mother stood silently in the background, her arms crossed, her eyes cold, and completely devoid of maternal instinct as she looked away. I begged them to listen, tears streaming down my burning cheeks, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Driven by blind rage, my father dragged me to the front entry, unlocked the heavy wooden door, and shoved me out into the blinding white vortex of sub-zero wind and ice. "Get out," he snarled. "I don't need a sick, destructive daughter ruining this house." Before I could even raise my hands to plead, the door slammed shut, and the heavy deadbolt clicked into place. Barefoot, wearing nothing more than thin pajamas and a light jacket, I was left alone in the dark as howling snow slashed across my bare skin. My lungs burned with every shallow breath, the freezing air constricting my chest until I could barely gasp. I stumbled down the icy mountain road, the storm swallowing all sense of direction. I made it less than a quarter mile before my legs gave out completely. I collapsed into a deep snowbank near the dark edge of the woods, my vision fading to black as hypothermia quietly took hold. Darkness was closing in, and the freezing numbness had almost completely silenced the pain in my chest. But just as my consciousness began to slip away into the blizzard, I felt a pair of broad, powerful hands lift me out of the snowbank. I couldn't see his face through the thick curtain of white, but his grip was firm and steady as he wrapped me in a heavy wool coat and carried me through the storm. When I finally opened my eyes, the harsh wind was gone. I was lying near a crackling fireplace inside a warm, rustic cabin, bundled under thick blankets. A man sat nearby, his face shadowed by the firelight, his hands showing deep, weathered scars. He offered me a mug of steaming hot broth, his voice soft and steady as he helped me sit up and catch my breath. "You're safe now," he whispered gently. What's your name, kid? Clara. I wheezed, my throat raw from the cold. Clara Whitaker. The moment that last name left my lips, the man went completely motionless. The quiet warmth in his eyes shifted instantly into an intense, piercing focus. He didn't ask why I had been out in the storm, nor did he offer to take me back home. Instead, his jaw tightened, and without hesitation, he wrapped me back in a blanket, carried me to his truck, and drove straight toward the regional hospital to get me medical care and document every mark the frost had left behind. The emergency room was cold and bright, but for the first time in hours, the air entering my lungs was warm. The hospital staff had acted immediately, treating my severe hypothermia and stabilizing my breathing. But after examining the frostbite on my skin and hearing how I ended up in a snowbank, the head nurse called the authorities, registering my case as severe child neglect and abandonment. They contacted my parents, ordering them to report to the ICU straight away. An hour later, the heavy double doors swung open. Richard marched in, my mother trailing just behind him. His face was set in a mask of calculated outrage, fully prepared to play the role of a long-suffering, concerned father dealing with a rebellious, runaway teenager. He was already rehearsing his excuses to the nurse, ready to weave another lie to cover his tracks. "We've been worried, sick," Richard began, his voice echoing loudly in the hallway. "She ran off after a temper tantrum." He cut himself off mid-sentence. Standing right beside my hospital bed was the man who had pulled me from the storm. He had his arms crossed, staring directly at my father with icy, unwavering calm. The moment Richard's eyes landed on him, every drop of color drained from my father's face. He stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping as a look of sheer terror washed over him. His hands began to shake so violently he had to grab the doorframe just to keep from falling. "You," Richard stammered, his voice cracking into a horrified whisper. You can't be here. You died 12 years ago." My rescuer didn't flinch. He took a slow step forward and said, "I survived the night you left me, Richard. And tonight, I saved your daughter from the exact same fate." The quiet tension in the hospital room shattered like glass as the man, Julian, stepped toward my father. Standing before the police officers and attending doctors, Julian unraveled the dark history my father had buried for over a decade. He revealed that he was Richard's former business partner and my mother's estranged brother. Years ago, when Julian discovered Richard was embezzling funds from their company, my father had framed him, stripped him of his assets, and deliberately abandoned him in a remote cabin during a brutal snowstorm, leaving him for dead to protect his own greed. "He tried to erase me back then to cover his tracks," Julian said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "And tonight, he tried to do the exact same thing to his own daughter because she became a burden to his precious image." As the officers absorbed the gravity of Julian's words, a commotion echoed from the waiting room. 2 deputies brought in my sister, Chloe. Under the intense glare of the police officers and the crushing pressure of the situation, Chloe completely broke down. Sobbing uncontrollably, the golden child finally cracked. She confessed to the officers that I had never broken the heirlooms or hidden the ledgers. She admitted she had staged the entire disaster and lied to our parents simply because she was jealous of the medical attention and care I was receiving for my illness. My father stood frozen in the center of the room, exposed and defenseless. The carefully constructed facade of the respectable family man had completely collapsed, leaving only a cruel coward exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. The hospital room filled with police officers as the full reality of what my parents had done finally caught up to them. Child Protective Services arrived within the hour, officially taking me into emergency state custody right there from my hospital bed. My father attempted to bluster his way out of it, invoking his standing in the community, but the police weren't listening anymore. Driven by the medical reports detailing my severe hypothermia, the physical evidence of exposure, and Chloe's tearful confession, the officers placed Richard under arrest on charges of felony child endangerment and criminal neglect. Meanwhile, Julian handed over an extensive file he had meticulously kept for 12 years, bank statements, corporate filings, and land deeds that proved Richard's historic fraud and embezzlement. The paper trail was airtight, ensuring my father wouldn't just face charges for what he did to me, but would also finally answer for the financial crimes that had built his fake empire. While my biological parents were dragged into the legal system, my own recovery began. Julian stepped forward without hesitation, filing for legal guardianship. Because he was my mother's brother, the state approved the emergency kinship placement once my health stabilized. Leaving that hospital, I didn't return to the house of secrets and emotional abuse. Instead, I moved into Julian's warm, quiet home on the edge of town. For the first time in my life, I had a guardian who didn't view my presence as a burden or my health as an inconvenience. With Julian's patient support and the care of extended family members who had long been cut off by my father, I slowly regained my physical strength. I got proper treatment for my condition, completed my high school education with high honors, and finally learned what it felt like to sleep through the night knowing the door was locked to keep danger out, not to keep me frozen in the dark. 12 years have passed since that terrifying night in the blizzard, and today, at 27, my life couldn't be more different. The dark shadows of my childhood no longer define me. My father's financial empire completely crumbled under the weight of his criminal charges, resulting in a prison sentence and total bankruptcy. My sister, Chloe, alienated by the fallout of her own lies, lives an isolated life far away, forever tied to the scandal she helped create. As for me, I built a life rooted in genuine love, trust, and resilience. With Julian's unwavering guidance, I finished college, built a successful career in child advocacy, and learned that family isn't defined by the blood running through your veins. It's defined by the people who stand by you when the storm is at its worst. Every winter, when the snow begins to fall outside my window, I don't feel fear anymore. I only feel gratitude for the man who pulled me out of the freezing dark and gave me a second chance at life. Now, I'm curious to hear from all of you listening to my journey today. If you had been in my shoes that night at the hospital, could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a parent who left you in the cold, or would you walk away forever like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.